Okay, hi. So I'm here to just briefly explain in video form, because I already did a written form. I'm going to explain video oratively my new poetry category or sound poetry category that I call Écho-Sémantique poetry. So this um, this is an extension, my attempt to expand the medium of sound poetry, which was a 20th century, well, it was popular in the 20th century form of art expression and poetry that climaxed in popularity during the Dada and the Surrealist movements in mostly Europe as well as the west coast of the United States from the 1910s to the 1930s. So I describe this as a fourth category of sound poetry, my Écho-Sémantique, because there are three types of sound poetry that have already been established or that were primarily established during the Dada movement. There is Bruitist poetry, which is poetry that is strictly phonetic and made of sounds and not by semantics or logic, or it's not lexical or grammatical in any way. It's just meant to be vocalized or using any sounds that your body can produce. And the second is called simultaneous poetry, or at least that's the translation of it, which is poetry that is told in different ways, in all kinds of ways, whether that's in different languages or performed by different people or performed at different volumes all at the same time, which I would describe as my favorite of the three primary categories of sound poetry. And the third one is called movement poetry, which is the highest theoretical example of sound poetry, as it fits the very definition, which the most simple definition of sound poetry is poetry that is not meant to be written or literized in any way, but it's meant to be performed, to be literally expressed. And movement poetry can be asemic poetry, but it can also be normal written poetry with semantics. But it is accompanied by movement, whether that's dance or more primitive, less structured movement, which went on to become performance poetry. So this fourth one called Écho-Sémantique poetry. So why don't I talk about the inspiration? The inspiration for this came from a piece I read about by Korean artist Namjoon Paik, who is one of my favorite artists, impossibly creative, impossibly prolific, just a jack of all trades. He's mostly known around the world as a pioneer in video poetry, but he was a jack of all trades. He did a lot in music, he did a lot in performance art, he did a lot in experimental film. He really is, in my mind, the equivalent of a modern-day Jean Cocteau. So he made a piece called Video Fish, but I've heard it called TV Fish too. I don't know the real name. If anyone does, let me know. Which was a piece he made of a series of fish tanks, horizontal fish tanks, that had real fish in it, but right behind each of the tanks is a monitor, one monitor behind each tank that showed videos of fish. And I thought this was so creative, and I was astonished by it, and I thought about it for a long time. But then the thought came to me, why don't I make an audio equivalent of that? So I did. So Écho-Sémantique poetry is basically poetry that where you take any object, or you take an animal or any noun, and you either use the semantic meaning of it, rather just saying the word of what it is in whatever language, or you can describe what it is, use descriptions of it, but then in the background, maybe with different sides of the audio, or with different, or at a lower volume, or with more echo, you can put something else that is what the object actually sounds like. For example, if you talk about what a penny looks like or feels like, but then a quieter noise you'll hear is someone dropping a penny, or tossing a penny, or spinning a penny, whatever that means. So that is largely what echo-semantic poetry is. That's all it is. And I've made 2 examples about it in my new collection of sound poetry called I Promise the Buddha is Not Melting, which is largely inspired by Namjoon Paik himself. I highly recommend you check out his stuff. It was roughly like I was blind and then could see when I learned about his stuff. I was in awe at his Wikipedia article. And so I think, what else have I covered? Everything. Yeah, so the 2 last pieces on the Buddha is not melting, or the Buddha is melting, is one about coconuts. It's called the hysterical coconut, and one about whales. It's a little provocative, but I found it creative and necessary, and that is directly derived from a piece that June Paik did in playable pieces. And I don't even know if YouTube will allow me to explain that in detail, so you can find more written details in my Substack and my blog and whatever. So yeah, that's a brief description of what echo-semantic poetry is, and I hope this inspires something in you, and maybe you can create something yourself, whether that's a painting or a new form of sound poetry. And yeah, thank you. Out.